Hey guys, Venom here, back at it again. Today we are going over painting a Boba Fett figure. Now I know it's a little bit different, this is going to be a very long video and I apologize in advance, but there is going to be a sweet reward of seeing the finished figure in the end. And maybe you can use this as a step-by-step tutorial to make your own. Of course, as per usual, I'm going to plug in our store. This is where you can get our kits, especially this one featured here in the video, the VenomPaintball.store. It's actually coming out this Friday in our upcoming Wave 6 release. We usually do waves at the end of every month with a handful of releases from our partners and creators and even ourselves. Now, this figure uses a multitude of different parts. It uses a ball-jointed head, which is also launching this Friday, a neck gasket that we've had for a while, a painter's hip, just so you don't have to carve the hips, and it's just super easy. And just an overall Lego body, and you can tell it's a Lego rubber body, nothing super special here. We're going to spray paint it over it anyway, so it's not a big deal. And as you can see here, I'm using some blue tape to cover the rubber part of the neck gasket. This is just to make sure paint doesn't get on there and get a mess and make it harder for the head to move on its own. And this paint I'm using is nothing special, it's just a primer, and also just happens to be the right color gray that I want. Now you could do a color on top of your primer, but for this application I'm not really worrying about it. I did do a fairly good coat just to make sure it was on there pretty good. I know with this ABS plastic, especially from Lego, sometimes paint just doesn't like to stay. But when it comes to aerosol spray paints and primers, you want to let them sit for about 24 hours or so to let them cure, if not longer, depending on where you live, humidity levels, and all that stuff. As you can see, I didn't really go over this earlier, but it does include, the assembly does include the leg pockets, because they also need to be the same color as the jumpsuit, so I just went ahead and glued them on. Now, I'll do almost everything else afterwards, but it's just something to keep in mind. Just when you're priming things, whether you want those to be the same color or if you'll paint them after the fact. As you can see here, I'm using super glue in my paint palettes to kind of apply the glue. Just put a little dot on the thing, and I used a simple little toothpick that I've used for glue and for paint in the past that I use for application, just so I get a precise amount of super glue on the armor kit in general, so I don't make a huge mess. And we're using magnets as well, as you'll tell later in this video that the magnets are used for the jetpack to attach to the back plate of the armor. Just super easy to come and go, maybe replace the jetpack down the road or whatever. Now we'll be super gluing the torso down to the body just so it doesn't move, and also just to get it to fit perfectly, because on its own resin prints have a little bit of warping, so they'll like warp outwards and away from the Lego body, but if you use a little bit of glue, it'll be perfectly fine and no issue. Now I'm using ArchiveX paints. You don't have to use ArchiveX. I just I've had these because I painted Boba Fett helmets in the past, like life-size ones, and so I happen to have color-matched ones to the original Boba Fett, which is fantastic. And for this, I'm using the darker green for the torso application. There are two different greens that come in the Boba Fett ArchiveX kit, and so I just rolled with it. Initially, I used the sand green one, but I figured out that was the wrong color, and it's only just the helmet that has a sand green, but it also has a dark green as well, which also is a little confusing, and I'll go over that later in the video. And of course, here, we didn't use any primer for the other parts. Depending on your application, primer's good, but when it comes to stuff like this, if you just use like a sealant on top of this, it'll be perfectly fine. Nothing too terribly to worry about if you use a sealer in the end, at least in my experience. Your experience might vary depending on where you live, of course, humidity and all that stuff. Of course, getting all the edges and covering it multiple times. When it comes to paint, you don't want to just glob it on there. As you'll see later in this video, I do that quite often, which ends up leading to mistakes. But even just a couple of passes of the paint to get like that deeper color will make all the difference in the world. So you have an even clean application and just generally a great looking part. Of course, this is just the base color, so I'm not being particularly careful of my application. I do want a smooth surface, so I've gone over it, as you can see with the paintbrush, multiple times to make sure it's an even coat. What can make or break a painter is really just the unevenness of paint and the lack of cleaning of the prints beforehand. Now, before this film, I actually went back and kind of cleaned up some of the parts with an X-Acto knife and a little bit of sandpaper to get the right edges. But a lot of these parts didn't need it, so it's not like the worst thing in the world. It's really just the helmet and the jetpack usually need it the most. But it's really not that terrible. And of course, you can see I didn't go in between the chest plate with the paint. I wanted to add a little bit of depth and not worry about getting the inside of it and then having to go back over it again with a different color gray, because the gray somewhat vaguely matches what the body's going to be anyway. I did paint over every single part that I could, though, except for the in-between chest plate layers, just kind of as a preventative measure. Even if it was like the same color in the end, I just wanted to make sure it was all sealed and it was good, because sometimes there's like little tiny micro cracks within resin. Over time it'll dry out, and sometimes it'll reveal itself in ugly ways. That's why I always tell people to paint over your resin prints, whether it's going to be black or gray or whatever anyway, just to kind of have that little sealer and also get any rough edges out too. So here you can also see I'm doing a little bit of cleanup work with the X-Acto knife. I'm doing nothing super special. There's just a couple of issues where the supports were when I printed the helmet, and kind of cleaning up that back edge as well. That usually happens to have the most problems, is just the back helmet edge. So I usually go over it with the X-Acto knife just to kind of clean it up a little bit. Nothing too serious. And just lightly scratching away just the little surface. And when you go over it with paint, as long as the surface is clean, it'll go right over it and smooth it out. Like, you'll be able to tell in the aftermath that you won't be able to see any lines or any issues. And you can see I'm doing a very thick layer here, and personally I got away with it, but usually I don't get away with that thick of a coat, and it's just something to do. So I'm doing the first green here. This is the dark green, like I did on the torso. It's the back vent and the earpiece for Boba Fett. Everything else has a different color green, and it's just, if you're like me and you want accuracy, that's what you do. But if you're just going for like a quick paint up, then you really don't need two greens. I mean, it's really hard to tell. It's just a really small notice and change. Like for the helmet, you can tell the difference for sure, especially the cheeks and the dome, but not really the chest plate. As you can see here with the net gasket on, the head doesn't go all the way down, which isn't a big deal. You can't really tell when all the pieces are on, but you can see you get that great posability with these flexible heads, with them having a rubber ball joint, and so you don't have to use like blue tack or clay to get a really weird method out. And it's just overall a really fantastic method to get perfect posability with your figures without some sort of really weird technique, whether it's using like an unofficial head or something really weird. Because I've had them in the past and it's not as great. And here you can see the color red that we're using with this build. This is D&H Caboose Red. It's a really great acrylic paint. All the paints I'm using today, except for the metal paint, are all acrylics, which are essentially just water-based paints, nothing too terrible. And the difference between these specific paints and just your regular like apple barrel or off-the-shelf paints is these are watered down a bit better for airbrushing, which is what these are specifically meant for mostly. But I find them really great for hand painting as well. And I heavily suggest, if you're using like apple barrel or off-the-shelf paints, watering them down some, just because they're not just so they're not as chunky, because it'll add extra chunks and dry really weird, and you won't have as much time to get a perfect finish off as if you had water. Water will take a little longer for it to completely air dry, which is a bit better. I mean, it takes you, an extra 30 seconds for the paint part to dry, but in the end, in the grand scope of things, as you see, this video is long, so you have plenty of time to come back when you're done with like one color, to come back with the next color once you're done with all the parts, and just keep an accurate rotation going. And you can see here, I am definitely globbing the paint here. I did get away with it. Like I said, I don't usually do. I don't really recommend it. I'd probably do 2 coats in the future instead of doing all of this. And I'm using a really tiny brush. They're Annex brushes or Alex brushes. I don't know, AX brushes. I think they're off of Amazon. Over the years, I've just accumulated a ton of brushes, and just any small brush works great. And you can just look up tiny brushes on Amazon. It might take you a little bit to kind of figure out what sizes you're needing, but there's some great brushes there, even at your local hobby store like Hobby Lobby or even Walmart. And now here you can also see with the pouches, these are also going to be the red. Realistically, it should be more of a brownish red than red, but I went with the same color just for less complexity, just so I didn't have to mix another paint, because I didn't see it as really super important. And I didn't fill in between each individual pouch just to add that depth again, and it's going to be the same gray in the end as well, and you're not going to see it exactly, and I just didn't see the point in going back over it and adding the extra gray down like later in the video. It's just a little extra wasted time. Realistically, there should be a girth strap behind the pouches, but it's such a tiny detail. I can see why Tag didn't exactly include it with the kit, but as a Boba connoisseur, just something to note. There's so many different details in Boba Fett that I didn't really realize were there until painting this, even though, yes, I do have a full costume, which I was actually using as a reference for this video. I was constantly walking over or snapping photos of certain armor pieces to make sure I got the right colors, the right damage, and just all around, just the most accuracy as possible. And as you can see here, I'm just doing right here to the pouches, because these pouches will be a different color. They'll be much more of a cream color. I did end up using much more of like a pinky cream, which really shouldn't have been used. It's more of like a whitey gray color that should have been used. But in the end, it's such a small detail, you're not going to really notice, so it's not that big of a deal. So I just went along with it. And here is the yellow. The yellow is for the shoulder pads. Realistically, again, being such a nerd here, but it should also have like a hint of orange, kind of like airbrush throughout. But I'm like, what is the point of bringing out an airbrush for something I'm probably going to screw up if I did it anyway? So I just left it yellow. Everybody's going to recognize it. It's going to be Boba Fett, so it's not really going to matter in the end. Again, I'm glopping it on there. I should have done 2 coats. I only did 1 coat. And if you look really closely on the figure, you'll see it's a very thin looking layer. And I should have gone back over it, but I did damage afterwards, so you can't really tell all that much. So, again, use 2 coats, use 3 coats. Don't glop it on like I did. And you can see here, I glopped this on here so hard for the jetpack. I ended up having to go over this 2 or 3 times to fix the jetpack. I did a lot of it off of camera because it was terrible. I probably spent, gosh, an hour of my own time outside of filming to try to get that jetpack right. I'll show you guys a little bit later what that looks like, but it's just a pain. Now I'm using the same detail brush to get a little bit of tiny paint scratches off. So underneath the green layers on the torso armor is a bit of revealing yellow and silver. The silver I'll add a little later in this video, but I'm being very careful just to very barely touch the armor pieces and add little tiny little looking scratches. Nothing more difficult than that, just barely touching it. Hardly any effort whatsoever. Doing it to the back, the butt plate or the cod piece. You're probably going to hear me refer it to as the cod piece because I just think butt plate is kind of stupid to be called. And it also has some on the back plate, I think, as well, but I don't think I included any. It's just really hard to tell with the back plate. There's not a ton of reference images on that, so I just went with it anyway. And of course, the yellow is also the knee pads, but the knee pads also should be the same color as the shoulder plates with like that missing of orange. I might do that down the road, but again, it's Boba Fett. You're gonna know it's Boba Fett. Like, I'm going for accuracy here, but at the same time, with the scale that I'm working at, it's a little hard to get everything across. Now, the great thing is about these specific acrylics is you can get away with watering them down a lot easier and, you know, adding that kind of misty, washy kind of detail, which is generally a lot of detail and just a lot of work, which I could do down the road, and I could weather the undersuit a lot better. My personal, like the whole costume that I have, the undersuit's not weathered just yet, and I think it looks fine. It needs to be weathered eventually for sure to get it more accurate, you know, just to add that whole element and detail. But I didn't worry about it for this figure, and I probably should in the future. Maybe if I sell it or do another one down the road, I'll go back and fix it. Now you can tell for the knees, I wanted them to make sure I did several coats on top of them, because they weren't as thick as I wanted them initially. So I was like, junk, I have to do more than one coat. Because I was trying to rush through this, and don't ever rush your figure. Don't ever. Be patient. That's like my number one tip. Even when we were decaling on this channel a while ago, my biggest tip I'd ever give is just be patient and take your time. There's nothing more invaluable to that than just being patient and taking your time. You'll nail it if you are patient, take your time, and observe the techniques that are presented to you. And so here we're painting the pouches with that same pinky cream I was mentioning earlier. It's a really hideous looking color, but for me, it satisfied my urge to paint them a unique-ish looking color to the kit. Now this is just using an Americana acrylic. I don't know what the actual name is of it. You can color match that a lot better. It's an Americana paint. My Americana paints usually come from Hobby Lobby, like 5 minutes away from my home. So it's really easy, not hard. You just need like 50 cents of paints. Like literally, I think they're like $1 a bottle for Americana, but like for Apple Barrel, I've seen them go for like 40 cents or something. Like you don't need to spend a lot. And so you're seeing here also with the Americana paints is that they're not watered down. And now this white is an airbrush paint, so disregard that. But the pinky cream I was talking about is, since it's not watered down, it was chunking up and not looking super great. Now, if it was for a larger part or for more of the figure, I would have probably taken the time and watered it down. But I didn't worry about it too much because you're not going to really notice it. And I apologize throughout this video. It's going to be out of focus. I just got my a new phone, so I'm not completely familiar with the new camera. I did have an iPhone 11 previously. Now this is an iPhone 13. And so it works a little differently than my old phone. And so I apologize, but hopefully you'll still get the main idea as to what I'm trying to do in the video. It's a lot of painting. I mean, it's a lot of painting. But I hope it still gets the idea across as to what on earth is going on, and that you don't need a ton of specialized tools. All you really need is a good paintbrush, and you can just buy some acrylics off of, Hobby Lobby or Walmart, and use like a little paper plate even, and throw a couple drops of water and just water them down so they're a little less thick and it's a lot greater. Now right here, I'm being completely messy for this helmet on purpose because I want to show you guys that you don't need to be clean with your initial lines on a helmet. Now these are the inside cheek lines of Boba, and it really doesn't matter how clean these are. The only thing I would mention is look at the cheek line, because there is a definitive cheek line on Tag's helmets, and so you don't really want to cover that up partially. You want to be able to still distinguish that, so when you go back and paint the cheeks, you'll be able to see where the cheeks end. And I kind of made the mistake of covering it a little too much, and I had to go back and touch it up down the road. But you can see it's really messy right now, and I'll go back and with the browns and the greens, I'll go back and touch it up to where it's a lot better, a lot cleaner lines. And I didn't use any tape, I didn't use any liquid latex or anything for this figure at all. It's all hand painted, and it's a very, very small brush that I use almost the entire time. Except for like bigger base coats like on the chest plate, I use a slightly bigger brush just to goop it on, which I probably shouldn't have done. I should have used that smaller brush and just, done it layer by layer, but I didn't. So yeah, you don't need a ton of materials, and so you just need a steady hand if you have one, or if you don't, just take your time and just go over it and fix it. See, right here with the caboose red that I'm adding in, it's the same red used on the rest of the figure. I just go back over it and clean up those lines, and thankfully the ridge lines on this helmet are super clear and definitive, so you can see exactly where you need to paint, and it's just so much easier. And so I'm doing the insides of the mandibles as well. That's what the face plates are technically called by most of the cosplaying community, and because that just adds a whole nother layer. It's getting those edges, and if you don't get the edges, you don't have that layer of depth in the figure. And that's one of the greatest things about this kit in general, is just the amount of depth you can add. It gives the figure a lot more height, a lot more fit and finish, and it just looks a lot more professional that way. Now you can always go back and touch it up and clean up the lines down the road, or do extra touch-ups, but hey, it's not that bad. And so here I'm using a gray, I believe it's the SP Lark Light Gray from Archive. Again, almost all of these paints I use in this video are Archive X paints. And excuse me, all the weathering is just this SP Lark Light Gray. And so this is just the base weathering that I did on this helmet. The rest of the figure doesn't really have this color. I did use this one, I think, on the boots down the road, but I'll tell you guys about that when those come around. I ended up doing those as one of the last things on this figure, and it kind of just tied everything together, made it just so good. So right here, I'm adding the little kill stripe or whatever to the dome, and to the mandibles, I'm adding a little damage, because I use a lot of references. I used, I think it's like the Dented Helmet, they had a gallery of photos from different cons and stuff that like the official costumes have been at, so you can use a lot of references from those to get everything in. And so you can see here I'm getting a lot of detail in that you probably don't recognize. There's a lot of dome damage to Boba Fett's helmet. Since I've painted a couple of these helmets now, I'm like, oh shoot, I should totally include this, because nobody really knows about this damage here. And you'll see down the road I'll actually add some silver to this to add the, the metal showing underneath, but it just adds so much more detail and just kind of almost a layer of depth with not really, cutting into it or whatever. There's just so many details that you wouldn't really notice without looking at reference materials and painting it yourself. And so here I'm using the silver, and so this silver is the only enamel paint I use in this whole build. It's Testors, I don't know, it's a silver from Testors. It's a little enamel little thing I got at Hobby Lobby. It's like $1.99. Super cheap, and you can wash it out with like some universal enamel thinner, or I think there's other alternatives you can Google. So I'm right here, I'm just getting the edges of the mandibles because there's a lot of damage on the insides of the cheek. You wouldn't really notice it without actually looking at like the helmet and looking up at it, and you'd be like, oh, that's pretty cool. And it's just a lot of details, And part of the side of the ear also has some silver, so I went back and did that and did some scoring and scratches that should be there as well. You'll probably see throughout this build that I use my fingers from time to time to kind of clean up marks and scratches and any sort of excess to kind of get smeared away if I can, or even erase mistakes or make them not as big. And sometimes it's in the same area and it doesn't matter as much, but it's super great. See right there, I'm using my fingers to kind of, that was a big oopsie. And so even me, as painting this figure, as you'll see in the end, it looks fantastic, especially in the thumbnail. I can't wait. Just, it is so pretty. Like, it doesn't need to be exactly perfect. If you add all the details and take your time and refine it, then that's all that matters. So you just want to refine it to the best of your ability. And so here you can see I'm turning on a different reference material. I wanted to show you guys that in between takes and stuff, I'd look at different materials to get everything I could. And if you see right there, I'm also adding some details of silver to the under parts of the helmet, because there is some scratches on that side, not necessarily in the back of the helmet, but more on the front side. And you can see there, I'm going back and adding the silver to the chest plate because it wasn't, it only had the yellow before, and so I want to go back and fix that up. And so right there, you can see I'm adding the silver to the dome damage. Again, not perfect by any means. I could totally go back and get a smaller brush if I could find one and touch it up, make it a lot cleaner. And right here, there's also some really cool details. If you look at reference images, there's like a little rectangular box almost of silver damage, which is really odd. Like, how on earth would that even get there? Don't know personally, but I just thought it'd be a really cool thing to add to this figure. So I did. And you can see a lot more damage here. And I forgot to actually do there's supposed to be like the orangey color that's on the ears, on the backs of the helmet as well. And I'll do that later in the video, but yeah, see right here. Completely forgot to do that first. You technically should do, I think, that color first, then the gray, then the silver for the back pieces if you want to do them properly. Of course, I didn't in this video, and it ended up looking fine. So that's just the way you could have done it. So you could, totally watch a section and then rewind it and then forward and then you get my idea. If you wanted to do it perfectly and do it better than me, which, you know what, send me a photo. I'd love to see if you did better than me. No, I'm kidding. Y'all probably so much better painters than me. I'm still very much a novice, even though I run VenomPaintball.store, and every little tip I learned from different painters is absolutely extraordinary. All the different washes and stuff people use blows my mind every time. And you can see here I'm also, putting the silver on the rangefinder because the base of the rangefinder is technically silver, and the whole thing should be silver, but since it connects to the ear, I decided to paint it that orangey color to kind of help it blend in with the helmet a bit better. And see, you can see here I'm doing the silver to the rest of the armor just to kind of tie it all together, because if you do weathering on everything, it'll tie everything together, but if you miss one or two items, it'll be like, this kind of looks off, and that's exactly why, is you want to get it as uniform as possible. Now, I didn't, I probably should have looked at a lot more references for where the weathering was if I wanted to get it perfectly accurate, but I didn't, and so it just is what it is. But I wanted to tie it all together, and that's what I ended up doing, is got all the edges of, as you can see, the shoulder pads, the gauntlets, and I did the whistling bird. I added the silver there because it's supposed to be like a metal piece, and so I went back and added that. And then I also did that to the Casio board, which is like a little compad little piece on the gauntlet with the whistling bird, which is a ton of fun. You can see here I'm putting on the boots. I apologize, some of these things are not in frame, but I wanted to give you guys the idea that I was, putting it on. So, and of course, that's just the base, and I did the SB light Lark Gray for the details, and then went back and added a whole bunch more paints and stuff afterwards, just to kind of tie it all together. It's not the perfect color, but again, it just makes all the difference in the world to base it, and then add that gray. It's just tying it all together is something it's invaluable to tie. If you do everything to everything, it'll be great. Thank you guys so much for watching the video this far. It really, really means a lot. I know it's been like half an hour of just me painting and talking. Thank you guys very much for sitting through. Let me know a Boba Fett that you know, or maybe even Google one and put it in the comments to educate me, because there's tons of stuff I still don't know about him, and I still have a costume. I know I've referenced that a good bit in this video, but thank you guys again for tuning in. I did a couple things outside of the video. I did do the black lines on the boots, and then the lines and just a couple details right here on the sides of the legs. Not perfect, but it doesn't need to be perfect, and that's what matters, because Boba's a weathered gentleman. He is a galactic bounty hunter. I also added the details on the shoulder plate, the little mythosaur, and the feather on the chest plate outside of camera filming, just because it's a lot harder to film something like that than it is to paint like a basic layer. So I did that. Again, it's really not that hard to nail it. You can tell I didn't do a good job. I really didn't. It's really basic. It doesn't need to be perfect, but hey. I also went back and sculpted a cape for him, and the Wookiee braids, because there are like a little piece of braiding from like trophies or something that he's collected over the years. Yeah. I also went back and redid the jetpack a little bit. I don't know why it's not focusing. And added the blue and the red, and I kind of just went back and touched up everything, cleaned it all up. Can't really tell, but I also did like a little wash on the top of the jetpack, because it's supposed to be a bit of like a transparent color. There's just a lot of details and stuff in this jetpack, and it's amazing. It took like an hour. Like I said, it was a bit of a process. That's why I didn't film it. So yeah, I think that's all the other touch-ups though I did. I didn't do hardly anything outside of filming, because I wanted you guys to see what goes into a figure like this. So thank you guys so much for tuning into this video. Really means a lot that you've watched this far, and give me a thumbs up or a thumbs down if you didn't like it. Let me know what you guys thought. Subscribe for more. If you guys want to buy this kit and make it yourself, visit our site, VenomPaintball.store, for more kits and plenty of more things that I'm working on, like Vader, Jango, B1 battle droids, tons more droids coming soon. So y'all check out our Instagram at venom.777. Thank you guys so much for watching. This has been Venom.